short introduction. Welcome everyone to the Metta Centre. I've been away, as you heard, so it's nice to be back to the Metta Centre in Sydney. And also very, very pleased to have Venerable Pandit back as well. So we had him here last year. We all really enjoyed his talk. And it's nice for him to be back here to give another talk. And also for a follow-up session on movie sessions, which we'll come to shortly. So tonight's talk is on the mind is a machine. And I'm very interested to hear what Venerable would like to talk on that topic about. Now, a bit about Venerable. Venerable Pandit is a British monk ordained in Thailand since 1996. And he has a degree in psychology and also in Buddhist studies from one of the Thai monks' universities in Thailand. He runs the Little Bangkok Sangha, which is the only English-speaking group in Bangkok for Theravada Buddhism. And that group has a website as well as a Facebook page, and I've been checking out some of the photos, and it's quite amazing. And they also had Ajahn Brahm there this year as well, with a huge attendance of people. So really setting up a good example in Thailand to have English-speaking Buddhism thrive there. So very good. And as a practiced public speaker, Venerable, often his talk is easy to follow, it's clear, it's precise, and I really hope you all enjoy the talk tonight. He's also leading another session at the Metta Centre, and that's on the 13th of May from 11 a.m. to 4:30, and that's on Movies That Move Us. And what that is it's a film screening of a Christian movie, which we don't know what it is at the moment. I'm sure that will be shared shortly, and then we'll have a discussion with it afterwards. But the point of it is not about Christianity or about Buddhism, but rather about the themes that film has. So the stage is all yours.
Thank you very much. Okay. Yes, the movie is I've shown. It's actually called Majo, and it was a 1972 Academy Award-winning movie documentary, and you've seen it, yeah. And I've shown this to hundreds of people, and it's just a really great film, and raises a lot of really interesting questions. It's about a Christian preacher who doesn't believe a word of what he's preaching. So a lot of good questions come up from this. So that's very enjoyable. And if for nothing else, the gospel music is really good. Somebody coming in here. Oh no. So, okay, thank you for having me back. Glad to be here. And I'll be over here at a Buddhist library and doing a series of talks on fairy tales, Dharma of fairy tales, and also at the Sangha Lodge. This evening, the title, The Mind is a Machine, this is a way of interpreting Buddhism as a psychodynamic process. There are different ways into the teaching of Buddhism, and there is the religious angle, there is an academic angle, there's a theoretical angle. You can view Buddhism as a philosophy, you can view it as a psychology, and very often people argue about these kind of things. Is Buddhism a religion or isn't it a religion? But then you have to define what religion is first, and then you have to define what Buddhism is, and of course everyone's definitions are different. But one thing that's fairly clear is the process, and what we are doing in meditation is primarily looking for the process rather than the content of the mind. There is a school of thought called Advaita. Does anyone know Advaita Vedanta? This is a part of, they say Hinduism, but I think the whole term Hindu was something invented by the British to describe the stuff that's in India that we don't understand, and we'll just call it one thing. And then, so in India, of course, there are so many diverse ways of thought and teaching. And this is one reason why in India especially they really consider Buddhism as just another one of those many schools that come out of India. Obviously, Buddhists very often say, no, 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 you have different ideas to us. But the Indian way of thinking is so broad and diverse that actually they will easily incorporate Buddhism too. And in fact, one of my main venues in Thailand, in Bangkok, is one of the Indian restaurants. And fortunately, it's one of the top Indian restaurants. And so every time we go there, I get my food. And that encourages me to make more events there. So this particular interpretation of the process, now I was bringing up Advaita because they have a very good idea which works well with Buddhism. Advaita is the teaching of enlightenment, the same as Buddhism. However, the teaching is very kind of ad hoc, thrown together, vague, because there was no particular style, no particular original teaching. So it's very wishy-washy. I myself, I went to meet one of these Advaita enlightened people. How do you know if someone's enlightened? I mean, you can't tell. Get them to do a Google quiz or something. You know, there's 10 pictures and you answer it and then it tells you whether you're enlightened or not. You can't tell, you can't. And usually people think that a teacher who they like, well, they're enlightened, and a teacher who you dislike, well, they can't be enlightened. And that's not it either. But one of these teachers was called Ramana Maharshi, and we're actually showing the Ramana Maharshi video at Lentil as Anything sometime this month. I can't remember the date. Patricia got me stacked up with all these dates, and so I've got, and it's so nice to have her organise it all. Normally I'm the organiser. I do the website and the Facebook and the graphics and everything. So one of these Advaita teachers, he described enlightenment. His name was Ramana Maharshi, and he described enlightenment as being like a cinema screen. And in the 1940s and 50s in India, when Ramana Maharshi was around, you can imagine a cinema screen was absolute magic. For the first time, people are seeing moving images. This is in Tiruchirappalli, which is, 300-400 miles inland from Madras. So it's a pretty poor area. And around the time that he was there, this would have been absolute magic, that you can see people up on a big screen. And not only that, but the stories, those people at that time, they'd never have had any other way to see Hollywood or people in America or Europe. They'd never seen big ships and big planes. I mean, it would be utter magic. So people were coming to him and asking him what enlightenment is. And he said, enlightenment is the cinema screen. And he said that on that cinema screen, you can play all kinds of stories of all different types from different nations. But all of these stories, when you're watching them, the one thing that you never ever see is the cinema screen, because you're so engrossed in the story of what's happening that you miss the actual thing that you are looking at, which is a blank screen. Furthermore, the screen is in plain sight. It's not hiding away somewhere. It's not something that you have to create or build or do anything special. You're looking right at it, but you can't see it. And the cinema screen is not affected in any way by the pictures that are shown on it. It's completely untouched. Now, you might know the Zen teaching like this in Zen Buddhism. They say the mind is like a mirror. For the same reason, a mirror can hold everything in the universe, but never be affected by it. So this was Ramana Maharshi's metaphor or indicator to point people towards enlightenment. He was saying that enlightenment is your actual nature, and that it's right there in front of you, it's not hidden. It's also not your enlightened nature is not something that you have to create or build. And this is a key point especially in Buddhism, because the more Mahayana schools tend to acknowledge this, and the Theravada schools tend not to acknowledge this. In Theravada schools, they tend to teach that you have to develop enlightenment, that it's going to take many, many lifetimes and struggle and toil until eventually you can purify to the point that you're enlightened. This actually does not fit with the Theravada scriptures either, this idea. Because in the Theravada, enlightenment is called the unconditioned, asankata dhamma. And the unconditioned means that this enlightened nature is not something that arises. It's not something that changes. It's not something that ceases. It's not something that's internal or external. You can't add to it and you can't take away from it. And that's enlightenment. In Buddhism, we don't talk too much about what enlightenment is, because to say what it is to give it characteristics. And you can't say that it's blue or it's black, or it's big or it's small, or it's here or it's gone, because it has no qualities. However, the Buddha did teach that he specifically stated there is the unconditioned. If there was not the unconditioned, there would be no reason for us to live the holy life. So he's very clear that this unconditioned is there. Unconditioned can also be called nibbana. It can also be called the goal. It can be called the furthest shore. There are many different words that the Buddha used for it. In fact, the only word that he didn't use for it was self. And that's the word that the Advaita people use to describe enlightenment. They say it is self. So this is where you get a philosophical split. But what they call the self has the exact same qualities as enlightenment in Buddhism. So, if this unconditioned is true and is real, there is absolutely nothing you can do to create it or to attain to it, because it's already there. It's like the cinema screen. It's right in front of you, but you're missing it. Why? Because you're caught up in the content and the process of the things that are played on the cinema screen. So this is why in Mahayana, many schools of Mahayana, and half the schools of Tibetan Buddhism, they have this idea that you are already enlightened. Have you heard that before? That they say you're already enlightened, and they say, great, I can go home. I don't need to pay my fees if I'm already enlightened. So what does that mean, that you're already enlightened? Because you're clearly not. Right? If you're suffering, you're not enlightened. You're not an arahant. What it means is that this quality of enlightenment is already there within you. Now we might say that that quality is like a spark within you. But that's because we are not seeing it correctly. But the enlightened people will say, no, the enlightenment is the big picture, and you are a little tiny spark that's just popped up and is going to disappear. You, as in your age and your gender and your beliefs and your health and your mortgage plan and all the rest of it. This is just a little errant spark within the frame of the nature. Just like any image that you play on a computer, on a cinema screen. That is not the cinema screen. So within this idea, the reason they say you are already enlightened is because that nature has to already be there. It's not something that you're going to build up by many, many lifetimes of dedication and practice. Of course, from the Theravada perspective, we say, well, you're not already enlightened. Enlightenment may be there, but you have work to do. And one of the epitaphs, or one of the statements that we find in the Theravada scriptures, whenever somebody gets enlightened, they say, done is what needed to be done. So I really like that phrase. It points out that yes, enlightenment might already be there, but there was something that you had to do. And this is one problem with the Advaita teachers, is that when you speak to them or you listen to them, they tend to just say, well, enlightenment is there, it's you, it's real. And you're like, yeah, but I'm not enlightened. And they say, no, you only think you're not enlightened. So the problem with them is they have no teaching. I went to see one of these people. His name was Papaji or Punjaji. You can see him on YouTube now, but 23 years ago when I went, you had to travel all the way to India, and you had to get a flight to India, then a flight to Lucknow, and then a bus to this town, and then a bicycle to another bit of town, and then you had to walk, and it was quite difficult. Especially because I'd actually gone to India to go to a different place, and they threw me out after a few days. The teacher who I went to see happened to be in prison, so then they wouldn't let me in. It's a long story. So I decided to go to see this person in Lucknow, and I couldn't remember his name. So I just went to Lucknow and I was asking around, and somehow I got there. And it's this beautiful little old Indian man, and he lived in a little house in Lucknow with his wife, and they'd set up a centre for him, and every day they'd go to his house and ring his doorbell and entice him out and take him to the centre. And then he would go and read from a book for a couple of hours, and then you could ask questions, and you would write the questions down and submit them to him. And he would read out the question and give a short answer. And it was beautiful. As I say, now you don't need to go through all this problem, you just look him up on YouTube. Now we accept him as being enlightened. Certainly I have no question. But he didn't have any real teaching. He couldn't tell you what to do. I was on my way to Thailand, I was going to become a monk, and I thought, some people go to these Advaita teachings and they just look at the teacher, and the teacher says, who are you? And then they get enlightened. Happens from time to time. So I thought, I'll try my luck, either a few lifetimes as a monk and renunciation and living in Thailand in the monastic, or I thought I'll try that one first and then I'll go to Thailand. So when I was there, he was very beautiful. It's really nice to see him come out. The thing that I loved was he would always come out and do this reading and answer questions, unless the cricket was on. If the cricket was on, they couldn't get him out of the house. I really liked that. I like that even if you're enlightened, you can still enjoy something. I just wish it wasn't cricket, because there's few things in this world as useless as cricket. I mean, it's awful. I'll tell you what cricket is for English people. Cricket is the 2.5 days of the year when they can actually see the sun, and we can actually go out of the house and stand on a piece of grass without coats and things on. And so we all stand around on the local piece of grass, and we want a way just to intermingle with the other people that we haven't seen since the 2.5 days of sun 5 years ago. And that's what cricket is. And you have a little knock of the ball and a cucumber sandwich and you all chat. That's what cricket is supposed to be. I'm guessing you guys might not agree with me. Yeah. So, he's very beautiful, and but people were extremely devotional. Some Indian, but actually more Westerners, I think. And one of the questions I remember very distinctly and very clearly, because he would always take the question. He had such a beautiful nature, and he would just open up the piece of paper like this. Just really nice and just such a happy person. He had no symbols around him, by the way, except for a Buddha statue. He said since he was a child he'd loved the Buddha, so he had a Buddha statue next to him. And he read this question, The question said, Papaji, I was wandering in the forest behind Lucknow and in the morning, and I came across this old abandoned temple. And I went and I sat in there, and something drew me into the temple, and I sat in there. And while I sat in there, the light came through the window, and Shiva came and appeared right in front of me and did this incredible dance. And every movement in this dance had a meaning that I understood with perfect clarity. And then Shiva disappeared, and I was left in waves and waves of bliss all the way until the evening. And then I thought, I was worried about getting home, and then I'd lost the bliss, and I can't quite remember what the meaning of the dance was, but I know I understood it while I saw it. And he folds up this piece of paper. He says, next time Shiva comes to see you, tell him to come see me because we haven't met yet. And that was it. That was his answer. I really liked that because people were coming to him with such devotion, looking for blessings, looking for deep meanings. And every time he'd always just try to knock them back to the simplicity of just being present. The downside with him was there was no teaching. He couldn't tell you what to do. He had a story about a lion that thought it was a donkey. It got separated, a bit like the Lion King, but don't get confused. It got separated from its pride when it was very young and was found by donkeys. So the donkeys raised the lion and they taught the lion how to eat grass and how to neigh and how to be with the other donkeys. And so he would go around grazing the grass with the other donkeys. And then one day, after it had grown up, there was a mighty sound came across the jungle, and all the animals quaked in terror, and all the donkeys wanted to run. And the young lion, who thinks he's a donkey, said, "What's that?" And they said, "Oh, that's the roar of the lion. And we've got to get out of here. The lions are terrifying." So they all ran. But anyway, after some time, the lions came again, and eventually the lions had caught up with the donkeys, and the donkeys had scattered, and only the lion was left over. But this lion, far from being eaten by these magnificent creatures, they said to him, "Come on, come with us." And he said, "But I thought you were going to kill me." And they said, "Why would we kill you? You're a lion." He said, "But I'm not a lion. I eat grass like a donkey. I neigh like a donkey." And they said, "No, you're a lion." And he said, "I'm not a lion." They said, "How can we prove to you that you're a lion?" He said, I'm definitely not a lion, I'm a donkey." Yet by the end of the story, the lion said to him, "The only way you will ever know you are a lion is if you roar." So after a few false attempts, the young lion roared. And once he roared, he realized he was a lion. Good story? I like stories. It's much easier to follow things in a story. So the idea is that you are already enlightened, but you don't know it. All you have to do is roar. All you have to do for enlightenment is wake up to your own real nature. That was Papaji's teaching. Beautiful teaching, right? But how do you do it? Like, okay, I'm ready. I believe you. I trust you. I'm here. It's my nature. But I can't roar. So the very beautiful thing in the Buddha's teaching was this idea of there being a practice and a thing that you can do. And one of the practices that we do in Buddhism is we look at process rather than content. So if we come back to the cinema screen metaphor, you can imagine that how would you get people to see the cinema screen? You have to say, well, you can see these images coming up and going down, but the thing that they're played on is always there. It's always present. Disengage yourself from the story on the screen. It might be Tarzan playing, it might be the Jungle Book playing, it might be Hopefully not Mel Gibson or something. I'm not a fan of him. You have to disengage from those stories. While you're caught up in the stories that are played on the screen, you will never ever see the screen. It's not possible. If you disengage from the stories, but people would come and say, well, is it a romance? Is it a action? Is it a science fiction? You say, it's nothing. It's none of those. The screen is none of the stories. All those stories, they like pop onto the screen and they disappear. And the closer and closer you watch them, faster you can see it popping up and disappearing. And if you're getting really close, you can see an individual pixel changing colour. So whether you're getting close or you view from far away, it's just stories playing out, coming up, disappearing, changing. The only thing that's not changing is the screen. So this is what we are doing in our practice. We want to start to view content, the process, rather than the content. We want to see not getting involved in the stories that are getting played out in the mind. Now, of course, there are some stories you have to get involved with. You have to have family, a business, you have to look after your children, you have to pay your pension, you have to dress yourself, you have to... I just found out in Australia, if you drive a car, you have to pay the government for your license every year. That's outrageous. Really. If I get my degree from my university, I'm not going to pay them every year just to keep my degree. But if you get Australians, you get a driving license, I think it's outrageous that you have to pay every year when you've already got your license. I don't think they do that in England. I think when you have your license, you keep it and you don't pay. Unless you need to print a new license or something, and then there'll be a fee. So, when we say you disengage from the stories, obviously there are stories, things that you do in your life that are going to need attention. There are stories that are important in order just to get by and to live. But the practice is one of disengaging from all the stories in the mind, all the activity, the things that come up into the mind, disengaging from all of that. Until you can disengage from it, you're always going to be caught up in the content of the mind. So we're looking at the process of the mind, and if you look at it in the right way, it will lead to what the Buddha called disenchantment. This word disenchantment, the Pali word is nibbita, and in Thai they say buanai, to get sick and tired of. But disenchantment, I find a really beautiful word because I love fairy tales. As mentioned, I'm doing a series of talks on fairy tales in the Buddhist library, the Dharma of fairy tales. And what happens in the fairy tale? It's the evil little demon or troll casts an enchantment on you, and when you're enchanted, you can't see reality. So there'll be a evil witch or a princess that casts a spell on the young man and makes him fall in love with her. He can't see reality, that she's not a good person. There's one story I read, this as a punishment, this one man, he got the enchantment of creaky knees, and so he travelled the whole world trying to find a cure for the creaky knees that had been an enchantment that had been cast on him. So our problem is that we are enchanted with the things of the world. We're enchanted with the stories in the mind, and that enchantment stops you from seeing reality. So this word that Buddha used, nibbita, is to get fed up of or disenchanted from or disillusioned from. And if you get disillusioned from the process, from the content of the mind, then you can start to separate it and come back, and you have a chance of seeing the cinema screen. Now you'll notice this practice is not developing enlightenment, it's simply seeing what your experience in a particular way. That you can develop. You might not be able to develop enlightenment, but you can develop that way of seeing your own mind and nature. So this mind and nature that we see, normally people relate to the world through their stories. And one of my big things in my life is I study story, how story works, different kinds of stories, myths, legend and folk tales, and then folk tales we separate into folk tales, fairyland tales, and then each of these has its types. But people relate to the world through their stories. I am this kind of person, I do that. And I saw a video of a guy in Alaska, and he would go out hunting in Alaska, and he's getting into his 70s, and the film crew is saying to him, but you're going to break your leg one day, and you'll be too far from anywhere to get help. And shall I do the accent? I'm rubbish at accents, but get this in a really rough Alaskan accent. And he said, a mountain man I was born, a mountain man I have lived, and a mountain man I will die. That's a story, right? That's a way that he's relating to his life and his environment. It's only a short story, but that short story is encapsulating an idea, which is an idea so strong that he will die with that idea. That idea will prevent him from not going out hunting in the Alaskan wilderness and coming to live in a town where he's going to be safe. Myths to live by, Joseph Campbell used to call it. Yeah. So, all of these stories, these are the stories that we live the life by, but when you do meditation, you start to break up those stories. Remember how it is, whenever you're doing your meditation, your mind goes off onto something. It's going off onto a story, some kind of story. You have to stop, break that story, break that chain and that process of becoming. Bring yourself back, usually to the breathing, but to whatever your meditation object is. So what you're doing is you're continually interrupting the process. It's like a cinema screen. If you continue, like the annoying people, I don't know if you have them in your house, are always pausing the film when you're trying to watch a film, and someone's always pausing, like, I know that actor, and they're getting Wikipedia out. No, just a minute, just a minute. No. Yeah, that was the guy in such and such, and you just wonder, what's the film? I annoy myself doing this when I'm watching things. And the only time I watch something all the way through is when I'm doing it with other people. And then, so we're continually interrupting that process, and as you bring the sight down, narrow the sight down, what you see is not these stories, but one little thought comes up at a time. One little idea pops up at a time. And that idea, thought, feeling, sound will have a certain amount of enticement to entice you to bring it into your consciousness and fill your consciousness with that one thing. So you'll be sitting there trying to do your meditation. I'm going to meditate, right. Now is the time for meditation. And after my meditation, it's time for my dinner. And I think today what I really fancy is Lebanese food, and you're gone, right? You've gotten into a story. But if you're meditating, you stop and you see that come up as one thing. You reflect on it. 3 seconds ago, I wasn't thinking about dinner. It had no bearing on me whatsoever. Why is that one thought tugging on my consciousness? Saying, think about me, be with me. So you cut the story and you come back. Now this is watching the process. So watching the process of things coming up. And what are the things that come up into your mind? These are the things that arise due to karma. And many people, I always get lots of requests to talk about karma. But the Buddha said, before you understand karma, your head will crack into 7 pieces. So I tend to stay away from talking about karma. But this is karma, this is habit. It's your habit of the mind that is controlling your experience. So, for example, if you're sitting here meditating, doing your practice, how often does it occur to you to think about Morris dancing? Never. Right? Because you don't care about Morris dancing. You've invested no time. Do you know what Morris dancing is? It's a ridiculous kind of thing, I think probably only in England. I hope it's only in England. Wouldn't be one of our best exports if other countries picked up on Morris dancing. And they put swords on the ground and they dance over it, and it's horrible. No offence to any Morris dancers. It doesn't occur to you for the simple reason that you've never done it, you're not interested in it, you've never engaged with it before, so it has no attachment, it has no pull. So it's very unlikely for it to pop up into your mind. What does pop up into your mind? One thing that's been popping up into my mind since I've been here in Australia is how the English beat Australia at rugby 3 times last year. That pops up. I'm like, oh yes, when I go to Australia I'm going to have to remind people about that. Because it's so rare that something to get excited. But do you care about rugby? Well, if you've watched it and you know who the players are and you've enjoyed it, yeah, rugby will pop up into your mind. But if you don't care about rugby, it's not going to pop up. So this mechanism of the mind is a very straightforward machine. There's nothing really deeply religious about it. Things will come up because you've thought about them, valued them and cherished them in the past. You've given a karmic weight to those things. And the more karmic weight you give to something, the easier it is for it to come back up into your mind. I really saw this when I was first started meditating. I was around 21 years old and I worked in a French brasserie, and people would ask me for things like, can I have a glass of water? And we're a bit busy. And I'd be like, yes, because I wasn't allowed to say no, get it yourself. And I could feel, as I say yes, I'll get you a glass of water, I can feel in my mind, because I just started meditating, that I just don't care. I just don't care about the glass of water, and I know that I'm going to forget that glass of water. And true enough, 5 minutes later I'll see someone else taking a glass of water over, or they'll grab me and remind me. And I found it really interesting, that because I wanted to remember it. So why did I know I would forget it? There's no karmic weight that I was giving to that thing. On the other hand, one time I was flying to Switzerland to go on a meditation retreat, and I was stayed overnight in London in a friend of mine's house, and she was having a party, and the party went on to about 3 o'clock in the morning, and my flight was about 6 o'clock in the morning, and I had 2 hours to lie down on the couch and sleep. And as I went to sleep, I said to myself, I have to wake up in 2 hours. I have to. Otherwise I miss my plane, I've lost my money, I can't get on the retreat. 2 hours later, I'm awake. Why? I'd given the karmic weight to that thought. I'd invested that idea with an energy and an importance. And because of that, it's more likely to come back up into my mind. And this is what karma is. We talk about karma as being different kinds. The main kind is called weighty karma, heavy karma. So if you've done something really good or really bad in your lifetime, this will kind of inform your existence, and when you die will affect your rebirth. But heavy, weighty karma is also that strong thing that's happening in the present moment. The second form is proximate karma, which is what's happening right here, right now. So right now you are quite important to me, but by tomorrow you won't be so important to me because you're just one of those many people I've met. So the thing that's right there present is also much stronger karmically than something that happened a week or a month ago or in the future. Then you also have habitual karma of the things that you do habitually. If right now you're dying to go out for a cigarette, which you're probably not, but I myself am an ex-smoker. I stopped smoking like 15 years ago, but I clearly remember those times when you just wanted to go out, just have a cigarette. You always have to have a cigarette. It's a habit. It's a habitual process. So the next form of karma is habit. What you do habitually, that's more likely to come up into your experience. And then there's just the last very weak form of karma, which is just kind of process and things that are going on around you. Normally these four kinds of karma are associated with rebirth, and this is what will determine what happens when you're reborn. But I say it also affects you right here, right now. When you look at the process of what's coming up in your attention, you can see different things have different karmic weights. What happens when that thing comes up into your mind, but you don't follow the attachment? Don't follow the attachment. What happens is that story, that idea will start to fizzle out. And if you're very observant, you can watch things end in your mind. Now, if you can watch something as it arises and as it ceases, this is called knowing the name, knowing its name. And in fairy tales, what happens when a demon has cast a spell on you, this idea of the enchantment? How do you break the enchantment? You have to know the name of the demon that put the spell on you. And this is not about fairy tales, this is about psychodynamics, the machine of the mind. When you see things come up and disappear, you know what the name is. Jealousy, anger, hatred, and all the positive qualities too. You can feel it. When you do that, when you know what the name is, you're breaking the attachment. So this is like the cinema screen and someone is always changing the channel. So you never watch the screen long enough to get involved in any of the stories, because every 10 seconds somebody's flipping the channel over. It used to be like that in the old days. Some of you guys are probably too young to know. Because these days you just download what you want to watch, right? Don't you do that? In the old days you had to sit there with a TV and there was adverts and you only had four channels that you could watch, and you'd have to flip between them to find out which is the best one. And whichever one you were on, you're always worried that there might be a better one on the other channel. And then you're watching something and your brother or your father comes in and they flip the channel over. So this is what we're doing in the meditation, is every idea that comes up, we cut it, we stop it. When we stop it, we're continually flipping that channel. We never get involved in the stories. And this is the practice. How do we get back to the cinema screen? Well, the awareness itself is starting to withdraw from the content of the mind and just sees the process of the mind. But you start to feel the gaps in between the thoughts. In the gaps in between the thoughts, this is a very silent, very beautiful space. So there are 3 stages to this process. And these are my 3 stages. These aren't the classical Buddhist teaching, but just as a way of describing it. The first stage is you are heavily involved with the stories, things that you do, think, have, plan, etc. So you start applying mindfulness to what you are doing. The second stage is mindfulness kind of withdraws from the content and just views the process of the mind, this machine of the mind that's operating due to karma. So that's the next stage. You've taken one step back. then you start to get this sense of awareness, and the awareness actually runs through every single state of mind. At any point, you can always find this quality of awareness. Stories come and go, and what you're doing comes and goes. The foot goes here, the foot goes here, you get a coffee, you go to this place, you go to the bathroom, you do this. The experience will always be changing. But in any experience you have, there is always this quality of awareness. And that quality of awareness is the stepping stone. Certainly in Advaita they call it quite clearly. They say this is not enlightenment, but this is the stepping stone to enlightenment. The Buddha called it the door to the deathless. And mindfulness is the only door to the deathless. Mindfulness may come in other guises or names, but this quality of knowing yourself when you've stopped getting engaged in the stories and your attention is returned to yourself. How does this happen? Well, I don't know what your obsessions are, but one of my obsessions, Photoshop. Photoshop will kill me for days. And once I'm in, the entire world disappears and there's just Photoshop. And I'm worse than a kid on a computer game because I'm there just hours and hours on end, Photoshop. And I'm doing graphics for the website and the Dharma, so it's not, I'm not playing. I mean, I am, but I can tell myself I'm not just playing because it's for a good cause. But the truth is I'm sucked into that graphic design in Photoshop, layering pictures and... So I'll be playing on it, I'll be working on it for hours, slip of the tongue there. And then what happens is you go, and you look around, right? You remember the room, you remember yourself. And I'm like, my neck aches. My neck aches because I've been like this for hours. But did my neck just start aching? Had it been aching the whole time or not? What do you think? Was my neck aching the whole time that I was on Photoshop?
Probably, yeah.
It may have been aching, but I wasn't aching. I was in Photoshop. Right? So this is a difference. The I, the self, is only what's in conscious attention. So what happens is my conscious attention returns to this body, and then I'm like, the neck aches. Just like right now, you have a feeling in your big toe. Can you feel it? You might need to wiggle it a bit. Well, that feeling in your big toe was there the whole time, right? But you weren't conscious of it. So in Buddhist terms, you're not suffering over that thing. We're only interested in where conscious attention goes. And next year, if you want, we can do Freudian little class on Freud, because he has a very nice way to describe consciousness and unconscious and the pre-conscious. So the attention comes back, and I'm like, my neck aches. Like, it's interesting. My neck wasn't aching while I was on Photoshop. It was doing its thing, but I was in Photoshop. Now I come back to the body, I ache. That's really interesting. And then what do you do when you've got that moment of awareness that you've just come back? You're like, must be time for a cup of tea. Because I'm English, right? I don't know what you do in Australia. Cold beer, I guess. Must be time for a barbecue. See you. So, this is the process that we are watching. That quality of waking up, of being aware, that's what you're trying to develop. And you develop it very simply by giving it a karmic weight. If you give attention to any quality of mind, if you give attention and importance and you cherish it, it will be more likely to come up again in the future. So, if you start watching rugby and you start seeing who the players are and you start saying who wins, well, is it for me?
No, I'm so sorry. I was just taking notes. But
that's okay. So, where was I? We give attention to that quality of awareness when it comes back and arises, when that moment when you remember yourself. Ajahn Vimok, who was here the other day, he has this thing, he says, when I take a picture of you, you're looking at the camera because you see me taking a picture of you. Did he do this one with you the other day? It's his current thing. But when he says smile, what happens? Your attention, it's not on the camera, your attention returns to yourself. So this is what we're doing when we're breaking the stories. We're returning the attention to yourself. The more often you do that, the more often you come back to this wakeful, aware element that is behind every single mind state that you can have. You add a karmic weight to that mind state, it will be more likely to come up again in the future. I find it sad that children are not taught to identify this as an important part of your experience, because every element of society, your parents, your school, your friends, is teaching you to get involved in activity. And they never say to you, well, what's it like when you stop playing football and suddenly you remember yourself? What's it like in the morning when you just kind of like this and then you suddenly remember yourself? You fill up that experience with some activity or other. So this is what we're doing in the meditation. We want to come back to that experience, value it, cherish it, and then it's more likely to come up again in the future. You are more likely to see it when it does come up. Do you ever play that game as children with your parents, trying to keep you quiet in the car? I thought it was a game. Now I realise they're just trying to make us shut up. This is not, I Spy would be one, but this is, we would have Herbies, spotting Herbies. You remember Herbie movies? Probably some of you not old enough. It's a Volkswagen Beetle, and there were a series of utterly rubbish movies in the 1970s where the Volkswagen Beetle is alive and does different things and it can drive itself. They were good fun, actually. I remember really enjoying these movies. So we would play this game. Well, the parents would give us this game that you have to spot Herbies on the road, and as soon as you see a Herbie, you'd yell out Herbie, and then you score a point. I don't know why I never asked if we can convert the points into some kind of money or sweets or something at the end of it. Somehow we just thought it was enough to play the game. So what happens when you make that determination? Suddenly all these Volkswagen Beetles are popping out of your experience. Anybody else will drive down the road, you won't notice. You can drive for 5 hours. You'll not notice a single Volkswagen Beetle. It won't pop out. But once you identify it and you value it and you cherish it, then Volkswagen Beetles will pop out at you. So this is the same with any state of mind that you have. If you identify it and cherish it and nurture it, then you'll see it more and more often as it comes into your experience. And actually every person, every day, is continually having this feeling of awareness arise. And every person is just doing the wrong thing. They fill it with some kind of activity. Usually you go to the bathroom, you make a cup of tea, take a selfie for Facebook, whatever it is that you like to do due to your habits. So our mind really is a machine. It's a simple mechanism of things popping up into your mind due to karma, due to you adding a karmic weight to those things in the past. It comes up and it has a tug on your attention. Come and think about me, think about me. If we can cut that wire to stop getting involved in those stories, and the more often you interrupt the process and come back, interrupt the process, come back, interrupt the process and come back, after a while the processes just aren't as enticing as they were before. You get disenchanted with the things. of the mind. The mind starts to appear as suffering rather than as enticing. The actual phrase in the Pali, to finish off with, is Sabbe sankhara anicca. All sankhara, all mind states are impermanent. Yatha panyaya pasati, one who can see this with wisdom. Atta nibindati dukkhe, will get sick and tired of dukkha. Esa maggo visuddhiya, this is the path to purification. All mind states are suffering. One who sees this with wisdom will tire of suffering. This is the path to purification. All dharma, all phenomena are not yourself. One who sees this with wisdom will tire of suffering, and this is the path to purification. Thank you. So that's the actual original stanzas which we get these teachings from. Okay, we've been here 50 minutes or so. If you have any question or comment or an avenue to go into further.
You were talking about the content that we have to actually deal with in our everyday life, like work or looking after children, and then you talked about disenchantment from the content. Is it then inevitable then, if you want to get to that state of disenchantment, is it inevitable that you have to lead a monastic life? Because how do you reconcile, work, living with children, all of that, and
right,
being disenchanted unless you give up everything and become a monastic?
First of all, monastics really don't give up anything, and they get just as involved with the things as anybody else does. It might be running the temple, it might be doing the teaching, it might be doing the building. In my case, it may be doing the websites and Photoshop. It doesn't, people think that, oh, well, being a monk, you're just kind of so free and easy, but no, you're not. You're still with the same obsessions that you were before. So that doesn't help. It absolutely doesn't help becoming a monk. The only thing becoming a monk really does is it helps to corner you into the practice. And that's why I ordained. I knew I wanted to do the practice, but I wasn't disciplined enough to do it by myself. And I knew that if I'm in the form, then it will make me, I'm not giving myself alternative ways to go. And I figured that would be useful for me. What happens is then, I would eliminate that idea that being in lay life is really any different to being a monk. Being a monastic, it's not that different. Now the question is then, how do you do it? But this process is one, you start to see the breaks in between things. You start to get this sense of the mindfulness. So the mindfulness goes in stages. First of all, mindfulness of what you are doing. The second stage is mindfulness, or you're aware of that awareness, or aware of your own self, while you're doing things. So you can be doing anything, but one part of your mind is always latched onto that awareness itself. Then the third stage is, irrespective of what you're doing, you're just with the awareness. And the strange thing is that you still carry on doing stuff in the world, and very often you do it better than you would when you were really emotionally invested and emotionally involved. So many of the enlightened people, they say, well, don't worry about those things. Thoughts will come up when they need to come up. You'll do the things when you need to do them. They have a spontaneity of just dealing with things that are right in front of them. There is a book I read years ago of Bernadette Roberts. She was a Christian lady who got enlightened, or at least a good way there. It's hard to tell exactly, and she was going through this earth-shattering self-destroying process, that the whole universe for her was collapsing and changing. And all the time while this was going on, she had a husband and 2 kids, and they had no idea that anything was happening whatsoever. Because the way that you interact with the world actually carries on according to karma, according to your karma. There's one enlightened guy, and he talks about this, and he says, what is left over is a karmic wind-up toy that will continue working itself out for the rest of your lifetime, even though you're now enlightened. But that mind and that body and that interaction will still carry on according to its karma. So, you don't have to be a monk. The more you practice, the more your sight starts to latch onto this feeling of awareness itself. What you find is you can still carry on doing things. The only real benefit of renunciation is if you really need to make a strong effort to get control of yourself. Then becoming a monk or something is very useful, or doing retreats. That's what retreats are for. But you have to come out of the retreats, right? Nobody gets enlightened on retreats. You do that as a period of time just to get hold of yourself. Then you can carry on the practice outside. There's a guy I know in Bangkok. He was the managing director of a big hotel. And if any of you have worked in hotels before, you will know there is just nothing in this world as chaotic, as utter mayhem, utter disorganization as a hotel, especially a big hotel. You have people killing themselves, you have people killing each other, you have people trashing the rooms, you have someone overrunning a bath here and it floods the 10 stories underneath it. You have demands of people that want food, that want this, they want that, and hotels are, you have to be a very special kind of person. I've worked in some hotels, but only 15-room hotels, but even those are just chaos. This is Fawlty Towers, remember Fawlty Towers? He said, John Cleese went to some hoteliers and said, tell me what some of the big problems are that you face in hotels. And this hotelier said to him, getting rid of the dead bodies without upsetting people. And that's how the episode came about. They had the dead body and they were pulling it backwards and forward and trying not to let anybody see it. Because the hotelier had told him this is what happens. So, I can't remember where I was going with that now anyway. So,
CEO.
Yeah, so he was a CEO of a big hotel, and he went to see my own teacher. And my teacher said to him, sit and imagine a crystal Buddha in the center of your body. And he went into meditation and attained all these psychic powers and insights. And suddenly you could see layers of heavens and hells and devas and all the Ajahn Jamni and stuff. And so he told my teacher, who said, come and see me next week or as soon as you can, and I'll show you how to develop this and use it in the right way for Dharma. And then he went back to the hotel. Now he's have to run this huge hotel, but he's just seen something that has changed everything. So he cleaned out the broom cupboard in his offices, because it was the only place that people couldn't find him. And he would go and sit in the broom cupboard, because all he wanted to do was go back into meditation. He didn't want to bother with the business anymore. So for several hours a day, he would hide out in the broom cupboard and sitting and doing the meditation. But he said one of the interesting things was his work was better. He got more done and he did it better, even though the only thing he was interested in was going back into the meditation. Yeah. He quit the job in the end, and then he bought a cruise liner thing that goes up and down the Chao Phraya River. And I was like, why would you do that? That's almost as bad as the hotel. Anyway, there's a long story to it. But the point is that you don't have to be a monk, and it's when you're ready for it, it will start to happen. But getting yourself ready for it, that's the practice.
In your metaphor for the cinema and the screen, so you are looking at the cinema and the screen is there. What will happen if the movies are different? You change the movies.
Right, so the movie changes,
Yeah.
and what happens is you stop getting involved in the story.
Yeah.
If you're ever going to see the screen, you have to stop getting involved in the story.
So if you have different movies, it's not the same story. You're looking
Right.
at different
Yeah.
stories, so there's a break in between.
Yeah, but it takes a period of time to get involved in a story, 5 minutes, 10 minutes.
Yeah.
This is what advertisers do. They have 30 seconds. The only way they will sell a product is if they sell you a story about the product. So they have 30 seconds to hook you into a story. And then you're in. But with a movie, normally you take 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes in order to get involved in the story. But if you change the channel quickly enough, you don't get involved in any of the stories. So with the mind is we're continually interrupting this process, bringing the attention back home. And after a while, these processes, they don't matter anymore. Or the content of it doesn't matter anymore. And then your mind is withdrawing from that.
Yeah, how would you let go what's coming onto the screen?
Well, one story at a time, one thing at a time. When you're sitting here, even as you're sitting there right now, you can be absorbed in what I'm saying or thinking about it, or your attention can come home. Can you feel yourself now? That there is a moment of waking up. That's what we're trying to develop. When you do that, you've just interrupted the story, interrupted the process. And what will happen is another story comes in, and then another story comes in. And when you watch it in that way, you're like, ugh, disenchantment. Nibbida is the word. Yeah.
There's a school of thought I was reading, it says our mind is like a fish in the tank, always on the move.
The Buddha used fish, but he used fish in a clear pond as a symbol of enlightenment. Yeah. He said, if the pond is clear, you can see the fish, you can see the rocks, and everything is clear. Yeah, and that's a symbol of enlightenment. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Do you think that you can train your mindfulness to get better and get stronger, so that, like training a muscle, it gets stronger?
Yeah.
The more you do it, the better you are at doing it.
You create a karma around it, and so it's easier to arise. Yeah. It's like me, I like the boxing. And on tomorrow night, there's a big heavyweight fight. You know, I can't watch things like Batman and things because they're just violent and it's horrible, but I can watch it when it's real. I don't know. There's an art to it, there really is, there's an art to it. But that's coming up because I've thought about it before, I've given it karmic weight before, I've paid attention and given it interest before, so then it pops up. Back in England, I used to watch the rugby, and when I got to Thailand, I had no TV, there was no internet in those days, and there was no way to watch rugby, and it just vanished from my mind. Because you have to interact with something in order for it to become important. That's why you have to suffer Christmas dinners. I saw a great cartoon this year of there's a table and they're having their Christmas dinner, but there's a few empty chairs and one guy is on the phone and he said, "Oh, sorry you got caught up in the traffic. We finished the dinner, but if you're quick, you'll still get here in time for the argument." If you don't interact, then it starts to just vanish. So it's the same with this quality of awareness. But I feel that and Ajahn Vimok is on the same page on this one. People get a bit mixed up of mindfulness of things. And it's not mindfulness of what you are doing. And this is how it's very often portrayed, and is the first stage of the practice, to be mindful of what you're doing. So if you're eating, you'd be mindful of your hand coming up, you'd be mindful of the chewing. This is a good practice. But it's only a preliminary just to stop, just to interrupt all the other stories. But the next stage is that while you're eating, why pay attention to the spoon or the chewing? Because you could pay attention to the sound, that's equally real. Or the feeling of the seat, that's equally real. Or the people talking about you, that's just as real as eating. So they do these meditation practices to make you mindful of what you are doing. But the next stage is you have to stop being mindful of what you're doing and have that awareness returning to yourself. That bit where you have that moment of wakefulness that usually you would then go and make a cup of tea or do something else. That's the real, when the attention is returned home, that's what we're trying to identify. And you hang on to that even while you are doing things, walking, sitting, standing, moving around. You're hanging on to that awareness. After a while, that awareness becomes so clear that it doesn't really matter what you're doing, you're just with your awareness.
In other words, you get conditioned to it.
Yeah. So this was the mastery of the Buddha's teaching as opposed to other enlightened people's teaching. Because they just said, well, enlightenment is unconditioned. It's like the screen of a cinema. Like, yes, but what do I do? You're not telling me what to do, and so it's useless. But the Buddha was telling you what to do. Get conditioned to this one particular state, that feeling of awareness. That's your stepping stone. Yeah.
Can I ask about when you were talking about how you were engrossed in Photoshop and then you woke up? Because that reminded me of people like sports people or artists and creative people who say they're in flow.
Yeah.
But that's a positive thing, and people take that in some ways as almost being present because you're so in it, rather than being caught up in the content of whatever that activity is. So, what is the difference? Like, what is being aware, but being like Michael Jordan and being able to, make that three-pointer shot or whatever, versus being Michael Jordan in the content of the story that he's playing. It's like, what's, is
I've got you.
Yeah.
So this idea of flow, do you all know this term? This is, oh God, what's his name? Michelangelo Binkowski. He's American, but the man with the funny name. He's a good psychologist, and he identified this feeling of when you're in what he calls flow. So you're absorbed in an activity. And when you're absorbed in the activity, you lose a sense of yourself. You lose the self-awareness. You lose your past and your future and your worries. And you get totally united with the thing that you are doing. Like, it might be embroidery, it might be music, it might be Photoshop. And people report happiness from this sense of flow. However, it's not mindfulness. This is the first stage of mindfulness, as in it's mindful of what you are doing. But your attention is really simply swapping a whole bunch of other stories for this story and staying with it. It's still just another story. So no, you have to interrupt that. And there's a difference in that you are self-remembering. So my example is the kids who play the computer games. And they would play them outside in my temple, outside one of these monks' rooms. He had a row of computers, and the kids would come up and play on the computers. And then at that time I didn't live in the temple, and so I was asking this one kid, who was the temple boy, I said, can you go down and buy me my lunch, get me my lunch? And he was playing this game like this. And he's like, yeah. Like this. I'm like, no, I need my lunch. He's like, yeah. Okay, so I wander off, and 11:15 I come back and said, hey, you remember what's my lunch? He's like, in a minute. So I'm like, okay. And then at 11:40 I go back in. It's like, you still haven't got my lunch. I have to eat before 12. And he's like, in a minute. So you know what I did? Yeah, I turned the screen off. And he was like, oh. Because in the screen you're running forward, and when you turn the screen off, he's like, he can't control himself, and he looks around, he's like, zzz. So he goes off and he gets my lunch, and when he comes back with my lunch, there I am on the game. He is in flow, total flow with the game, 100% concentrated, but no samadhi. Concentration in meditation is when the mind stops still on a single object. His mind is caught up in a flow of many objects, everything's changing. So this is concentration in the English sense. This is not samadhi in the meditation sense. Also, he's not being mindful at all, because his attention is absolutely flowing outside of himself. He has zero mindfulness while he's doing this. If he remembers himself while he's doing it, then you could say he's being mindful. But that mindfulness then would be with him irrespective of the game. You could turn the game off, it wouldn't interrupt his mindfulness. So there is a difference between totally being absorbed in something, having your attention coming back. You're in a story in that sense. You have to break those stories. That sense of awareness that lies behind every state of mind, that's what we're trying to walk into. So no, flow is not it. However, flow does have a stabilizing effect. I mean, it's quite nice. And you always feel that flow is just like a slight sidestep from really good mindfulness and concentration. But yeah, they're absorbed in their activity. There's Charlie Parker, he said that, a great jazz musician, he said, you have to learn everything there is to know about jazz, and when you play you have to forget it all. You have to just be there with your instrument. So yeah, flow is not meditation. Yeah, there's a difference. You know yourself.
There's a question about karma. So
I thought that would come up.
So a lot of things that happen because of karma, things that happen to you, but not everything is caused by karma as well. So how do we know the difference?
Well, I want to pull you up on things that happen to you. And the question of karma is it things that happen to you, or is it the process of the mind?
But being born is like...
Yeah, but that's the process of the mind, that after you die, the mind moves around and it finds a solid thing to latch onto, supposedly, which is a rebirth. But let's not go all the way there, because we're on very spurious ground. The question is, if you get your car stolen, is that because you stole someone's goat in your last lifetime? Now, the things that happen to you is just the world, it's not your karma. How you react to the car being stolen, that might be your karma. But the things that happen to you, no, they're not karma. However, people will argue about this, and there are different viewpoints. I'm sat on the seat, so I get my viewpoint out, but if you ask someone else, a friend of mine, he had a hernia, only a young guy, a monk, Sri Lankan monk, he had a hernia, like one here, because you have hernias everywhere, right? But this is the stomach hernia, comes out of the wall of the stomach. And he went to the monk's hospital and they operated on him, but he was in a lot of pain afterwards. And he went back to the hospital, and so they gave him pills and said, you have to take these pills, and he was taking them, and he said, I'm still in a lot of pain. What is happening, all his lower body was getting into a lot of pain here. And then I looked at the pills, and they were paracetamol.
Yeah.
And so he went back 3 or 4 times, and they just gave him more pills and said, you just got to live with it and give it a few days. So I took him to the other hospital that used to treat monks for free. They've now removed that in Thailand. Not that I'm bitter, but... And I took him into the other hospital and they have a better ultrasound scanner, and they scanned him with the ultrasound and they said, we need to get you in and operate on you immediately. And his lower organs, especially his testicles, had filled up with fluid. And so that it was all filled with fluid and bloated. And so they had to drain all this fluid off from all of his lower organs here. And then he was okay. It was a happy ending, fortunately. So I was talking at the time, I was attending some Abhidhamma classes, and the Abhidhamma classes were talking about karma. So I said to the teacher, is this his karma? And he said, yes. He said, no, we can't say what his karma is, but let's speculate. He said, maybe in a previous lifetime, he had an animal and he tormented the animal. But at the end, instead of killing the animal, he let the animal go. And he said, now his karma is that he gets tormented by this painful feeling, but in the end, he got away with it. Is it karma or not? Or was it just a mistake that the doctor made? Or maybe the doctor didn't make a mistake. Maybe that was just his body's reaction. That happens sometimes. You don't. You never know. The doctor can do everything right and things go wrong. I mean, was it the doctor's karma? Was it his karma? Or was it just the fact that the hospital made a mistake or his body just reacted badly? We can't say it's karma. We just can't. It's just something that happened. But his reaction to it, that would be karma. That would be his habit. Does he react by suing the doctor? If you're American, that's what you would do, right? If you're English, you would be quite happy if the doctor says sorry. You're like, oh yeah, no worries. An American doctor would never say sorry because that's liability. I'm saying this in a law centre, I have to do. So no, I favour a psychological interpretation of karma. However, when we look at karma in the suttas, it usually refers to your rebirth. So I would admit that my own viewpoint, much as I will stick to it, is probably on shaky ground if you're going to argue with a Pali scholar. Was it Isaac Newton's karma that an apple fall on his head? Mm-hmm. Or was he thinking about the question and the problem at the time when the apple hit his head? The apple didn't actually hit his head. Do you know that's not true? You know the story, right? Isaac Newton sitting under the apple tree, the apple bonks him on the head and he thinks, why did it come down and not go up? It's a great story. It's only a story. And this is why I say you relate to the world through stories. What he actually said was, the idea occurred to me upon the occasion of the falling of an apple. He never said anything about it bonking him on the head. It doesn't even mean that he saw an apple falling, it's just that apple's fall, and that's what occurred to him when he was starting to figure out gravity. But he was in that whole idea first. He'd been thinking about Galileo's equations of movement. Galileo is the one who studied movement of things and ballistics and such like. And he'd been really working with this. The idea occurred to him because he'd given it attention and worked with it before. It's more easy for it to pop up. Yeah.
Wasn't it the Buddha's karma to be the Buddha because of what he did in all his lifetimes to get there? I mean,
This is the trouble with karma discussions and talks. Well, according to the theory, we've already said that there's nothing you can do to generate enlightenment, but there are things that you can do that can break your enchantment with the things. So that's the shortcut. This quality of awareness is the shortcut, and if you can latch onto that, your vision turns around and you find your own real nature. We hope. But the long route is if you perfect every single thing that you can perfect, your generosity, your wisdom, your morality, your concentration, your equanimity, your resolve, And if you've perfected everything over millions of lifetimes and you cannot be a better human being, there's nothing left for you to actually do, then you will become enlightened. But that's the long way round. So, one is not advised. It's funny, the Buddha never advised people to take that path. But in Mahayana, that's what they determined was the right path to take. That you have to become a fully enlightened Buddha, and not take this shortcut into enlightenment.
The Mahayana path.
Yeah, that's what Mahayana means. That you've taken a bodhisattva vow and you want to become a Buddha by perfecting every quality of your character before you become enlightened. That's what Mahayana meant. However, we might say Mahayana schools, now they have all kinds of different philosophies. But the original term, there's a very good book by Jan Natia, who lives in Bangkok, in Thailand, called A Few Good Men, I think it's called, and it's a study of this. She's an excellent writer.
I heard about that book, Few Good Men.
Not really.
What's the name of that movie you discussed earlier? Christian.
The one that we're going to do here is called Majo, and it's a Christian movie.
What's the name again?
Majo.
Majo.
But no looking it up beforehand, because what happens is people go on YouTube and they look at 10 minutes of it and then like, well, I've seen it now, and then they don't come. So it's worth seeing as a group, so you just see it all the way through and we get everybody's response and feeling. But the other one was Ramana Maharshi, and that's the one we're doing in Lentil as Anything this month with the Association of Engaged Buddhists. And that is the Ramana Maharshi was the enlightened Indian guy from like the 1950s. Yeah. And that's really interesting. If we get time, I'll also show Papaji, who I went to see. Papaji's passed away, but he had an enlightened follower who's called Muji, and Muji is still alive. And you can also see Muji on internet, on YouTube. So that's the other thing we'll be looking at.
Any last questions? Well, if you have any other questions, do leave it for the movie session when Venerable Pandit will return. And that's on the 13th of May. So thank you so much, Venerable, for a wonderful talk as always. And I just want to make a few announcements because Metta Centre, we've got a whole bunch of events coming up, very exciting. This weekend is full jam-packed, so it really is. Starting from tonight, started off very well, and tomorrow we have a full day workshop as part of a series of workshops. So it's actually broken up into 6 sessions over 3 Saturdays. So tomorrow is the first one, and it's the spiritual care training for Buddhists. And it's led by Bhante Pandit. She's a Korean Zen nun, but she's actually Australian. Okay. And she's lovely. And she'll be conducting this course free of charge. And it's a very valuable course for anyone who's working in terms of spiritual care, such as those working in hospitals, those providing chaplaincy assistance, etc. She's also conducting an urban meditation retreat here at the centre, and that's on the 3rd of June from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. So that's Saturday. Then on Sunday we also have a full day as well. That's with Ayaranya Devi, and that's a one-day retreat with her, and it's on Unlimited Mind, Unlimited Heart. And Aya's background is in the Burmese Pal tradition, but also she is now practicing in the Thai Forest tradition. And next Friday we have Aya Tapaloka. Now she is an amazing Vikriti, so we're quite honoured to be able to have her come here, so I'll highly recommend everyone to come next Friday. Coming Friday on the 5th of May, so that's 6:30 for a 7 o'clock start to 9 o'clock, and she's coming here, doing the talk, and then very quickly flying off again as she goes around the world giving talks. And the topic for her is transcendental love, because she did an amazing piece called Lasting Inspiration, and I read that piece that she wrote, and what she did was she, because of her background in not just the Buddhist practice but also the suttas, so in that article actually went through all of the qualities that was common to all of the bhikkhunis during the Buddha's time, and what were the qualities that led them to enlightenment. So a marvellous, beautifully written piece as well, based on the sutras, with all the scriptures in there. So I recommend everyone to come next Friday for that talk. And then on the Sunday, next week, Sunday 7th of May, we have a Buddhist music jam with Venerable Pandit, and it's an afternoon of sharing Western Buddhist music. And if you've ever seen Venerable Pandit, he's often there with his guitar, and he has a whole range of Buddhist songs that he's composed, and so he'll be sharing some of those with us. And so it's a session where we all get together and sing and have a nice sharing session. And so that's next Sunday, 1:30 to 4:30, jam with a monk. You can't say that every day. And there's a whole bunch of other stuff as well on our website, including a retreat with Ajahn Jamyen, which will take place at Santi Forest Monastery. So more information is on our website. If you're not on our email mailing list, please be on it. And also there's plenty of brochures for you as well. And we would love for more and more people to know about us. We're still a relatively new centre, and we are trying to get more people out there to come to the centre. We've got a great lineup of events, as you can see, but it's just about getting the word out there to let people to know that we're here. We have also been doing quite well in terms of getting our presence out there, and we're still run completely on donations, despite all the things that we're doing. Completely on donations, and we're still sticking to our guns that all of our events are free of charge. And the reason for that is because we think that the Dhamma is priceless and you can't put a price on it, and hence why we're doing this. So if anyone would like to support the centre in any way, volunteering or any monetary donations, then we would love to receive it, because that's how we will build the centre, from community support. So thank you all so much for coming, as always, and we'd love to see you again soon. And thank you again, Venerable.
I will try and be here on Friday. I used to know her,
Yeah.
but I haven't seen her for 10 years or so.
Yeah, she is just doing a very short visit to Australia, so we're quite lucky to have her come to the
Okay.
talk. Yeah, we'd love to see
Cool.
you.
Yeah, she stayed in my temple for about 8 months.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Like quite a long way back.
Wow.
Yeah. But
Which temple was that?
Wat Pak Nam.
Ah,
The last time she was coming to Thailand was the red shirt demonstrations,
Uh-huh.
and it was the night when it all kicked off and
right.
guns started firing, and then we had to cancel, and
Oh.
never saw her again after that.
Oh, okay. Well, reunion next Friday it is then. Thank you.